Walt Disney World may be the most magical place on Earth, but sometimes it's also the most anxiety-inducing. In this episode, we talk about navigating our trips as a couple of anxious gals.
Welcome to Always Planning Disney, where planning is half the fun. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Cheryl.
On this channel, we talk through all of the details that go into making our vacations magical.
So I think we have a little less magical episode this time in that, just an obvious disclaimer at the beginning that we're going to be talking about anxiety and some elements of mental illness in this episode. So if that's something that you're not in the mood for, then maybe skip this one. And I have a feeling we're probably going to laugh at ourselves a little bit as we're discussing these things, just with a little bit of distance from the situations that we're discussing. Just note we're not laughing at the conditions that we're talking about, but rather some of the situations that we found ourselves in the past.
And when my anxiety is acute and active, and I am in it without that distance, it is difficult. But with a little bit of distance, I can always find the humor in some of the situations I have been in. And also that distance helps me analyze it like we're about to do today. So in case I haven't said it enough in previous episodes, or if any of my planning details have not revealed it, I have anxiety. And I do have some pretty specific triggers, but it is a generalized disorder. And there are lots of things related to Disney, planning trips, physical things at Disney, so many physical things at Disney World that can be horrible for someone with anxiety, like me.
Yup, like me too. Anxiety is definitely my most pronounced mental concern of a nice little smorgasbord. And while I absolutely love vacationing at Disney, I look forward to it, I enjoy it while I'm there, it can also cause my anxiety to flare up. So that's what we're here to chat about today.
So I think we might move through this sort of chronologically from planning to getting there to being there. And so in the planning phases where we have been for quite some time, in our last episode, I shared like 50 or more things that had me all tripped up and second guessing my plan. And none of them were truly anxiety producing for me, surprisingly, although they probably were. It's just that where my baseline anxiety is, it didn't register with me as being very anxiety producing, but that's just because I'm riding too high as is anyway.
Yeah.
But on the mental health spectrum for me, some of those issues were more depressing than anything, and kind of got me feeling discouraged, unable to make decisions, lacking motivation, which tend to be flagging a little bit more on the depression side. But many people get anxious while planning, worried about making the right decisions, much like I do.
Yeah, I would say I do worry about making the right decisions, but for me, thinking through all of those options in detail, that's part of the fun. That's like why we're here on this YouTube channel, right? And so it's one of those situations where I think there's kind of a crossover between like anxiety as a problem and just my personality, who I am. And like those Venn diagrams are definitely crossing over into the planning territory, right? But I think it's more like this is just who I am, and it's the enjoyable side of things.
And I get so much enjoyment out of planning that when it comes time to make those decisions and I get a little twisted up in it, it helps for me to sort of remove myself a little bit, back up, kind of recenter, return. I still enjoy the whole process. But pre-trip, my biggest anxiety trigger is the thought of flying. I am a nervous flyer, but not as much as many other people are. I've mentioned before that I did some research on anxiety related to flying, and just in finding people sharing their stories and tips, I realized I'm not really that nervous about flying, and my levels are just that normal human reaction to being in the air when we're supposed to be on the ground. But my anxiety about flying is about missing my flight. I have nightmares about missing my flight to Disney, even when I don't have a trip booked. My next vacation is a year away, and I'm already up at night sometimes worrying about flying to Disney. And it's not like I can just show up early at the airport, which seems like it would be a solution, because I'm still anxious. I don't want my family and people thinking that I'm crazy getting to the airport way too early. And when you get to the airport early, you still just are nervous sitting there. I don't know. It's a lose-lose situation all around. I have no solution for it. I think I've just come to accept that I'm not going to feel good before the trip in the days leading up to it, sitting around in the airport. I can see my airplane and I'm still convinced it's leaving without me.
Yeah, I really feel for you. That sounds miserable. And yeah, I know you're already experiencing some of that this far out, and that's just no fun. And I imagine that the news over the past, what, maybe 6 months or so has not been very helpful, where like a lot of flights are getting canceled last minute. And so even if your plane doesn't leave without you, does it leave at all? Right. So sorry, I'm not trying to like make you flare up or anything, but the whole airline industry is real messed up right now, and it's making me nervous on just like a regular person level about, okay, I'm going to book this flight, is it actually going to happen? And I don't love that. I don't have a whole lot of anxiety about flying in general unless there's turbulence, and then I do get convinced that we're falling out of the sky. But I think again that's a normal human type thing to get a little tense and sweaty palms when turbulence hits. But I will say I rarely get a good night's sleep the night before my trip, because my brain is just very busy about, did I pack all of the things? Am I going to get to the airport on time? What is security going to be like? Am I going to miss my flight? And so it's just like a whole lot of things going on in my brain that don't really let me sleep. In addition to, I'm just so stinking excited to get back to Disney World, right? So I I tend to start my vacation a little bit tired and a little bit stressed out because I can't sleep on a plane. I just can't. So it's not like I'm catching up once I get on the airplane. I'm just gonna be tired.
Exact same thing for me. And all of these feelings, the fear of flying, the fear of missing a flight, the flight being canceled, and honestly, also the fear of terrible people being on my plane, because it
Oh
feels
yeah.
like that has like those numbers have skyrocketed too. It caused me to rethink our spring break trip that we were planning. Originally, we wanted to go someplace kind of tropical this year, which would require a flight. And I didn't want it canceled. I didn't want to be on a plane with other people. So we opted for someplace a little bit closer that we could drive to. And I'm not driving to Disney. Maybe one day in the future when I go without kids, or when I fulfill my destiny of living at Disney for a month, then I'll fly, but or drive. But for now, I have to fly. And so I still turn to Fly with Stella, the YouTube channel, to calm my nerves about the actual plane part of flying. And then I just suffer with the rest of it. I do have a set of strategies I pull from to help me when I'm in an acute phase of worry or panic, but I have to fly there. I just deal with it. And so far, I've got on the plane every time, like I've never
Yeah.
backed out.
Yeah, you have a good track record.
So once we're actually at Disney, it opens up a whole bunch of other forms of anxiety and worry. And many people, and I think this is mostly moms, get anxiety about the trip being a good time for everybody. A lot of people visit Disney World. It's a once in a lifetime trip, or maybe only a few times in a lifetime trip. You spend all your money on it. I mean, you spend all your money on a Disney trip. You want it to be a good time. That's stressful. It creates anxiety. I don't have this too much because we are Disney pros at this point. We know what we like. We know what to expect. We know how to create a trip that we will all enjoy. But high expectations can ruin anything, absolutely ruin it. And Disney World is included in that.
Yeah, this definitely hit me last trip. And I've told this story before, but last trip we were staying at Animal Kingdom Lodge and they were doing some construction. And part of that is that they have to test the fire alarms for multiple hours every afternoon. And that was right during the nap time, which was the whole reason that I had booked the room that I had at Animal Kingdom Lodge for my 2 and 3 year old, because he turned 3 over the trip. He really needed his naps when I booked that trip. And so I was doing everything I could to make sure that happened so that we had a really happy day the rest of the time. And then I got there and found out, oh, his nap that I had planned so carefully for was not going to be a possibility because it wasn't like quiet enough. It wasn't possible. Like there were lights blaring, like everything. And so that was really hard because we had to completely change our plans. We were going to go back for nap time every day. And then we thought that they had gotten through their testing and we could enjoy the second half of our trip. We could come back for naps and pool time and all of that. And then we came back one day and the fire alarms went off again when my 3-year-old was in the bathroom, which is like the worst time for a small child to like suddenly have alarms going off. So I rushed him outside without any shoes on and sat him on a bench with his lunch and just cried until a cast member came up and checked on me because I was that mom that was losing it at Disney World. So I think stuff like this happens to a lot of us, maybe most of us at some point in the trip, especially moms. But I also think that this is something that all of us who are responsible for planning our trips need to find a way to let go of one way or another. I don't know how, but I think we need to figure it out, because I think that this stuff not going to plan is probably the number one cause of ruined trips. And it's mostly in our minds, right? So like, yes, there was a situation with the fire alarms that I didn't know about in advance. I couldn't make adjustments for, and that was really frustrating. But the adjusting to it was up to me, right? And that's where things got ruined, is I went down and I was tired from a long trip and I really needed that nap and I cried at Disney World. And the thing is, everyone at Disney World has spent a bunch of money to be there and to have an amazing time. So we need to keep in mind as we're planning these trips that we're not just planning them for ourselves, but like we're sharing this experience with tens of thousands of strangers and we're all like impacting each other's trips. And so I think it's just best to like try to be a positive impact on others' trips and then just let the negatives roll off our backs. Easier said than done.
It's a great perspective. I want to remember that because it is a shared experience amongst so many people, and we are our energy, we're creating that for everybody else too. So I will definitely keep that in mind. It is easier to say than to do. One of the things I try to do in part of my planning and when we're there is to have lots of things I'm looking forward to, because it can be disappointing if you have that one thing you really want and you get there and it's under construction, or it's broken when it's your time to get on it, or it's gone by the time you show up, or it's raining, something can happen.
Yeah.
So have lots of things to look forward to. That really helps. All right. So my real issue in the park is my claustrophobia. It is one of my biggest panic attack triggers. I cannot be trapped. I know that my fear of enclosed spaces is actually a power related issue. I don't like to not be in control. I am the only person who drives on family vacations. I am in control of everything all the time, because when I am not, it is difficult for me. And claustrophobia is part of that, because when you are feeling trapped, it means you are not in control. And I really need to know I have the ability and the power to move or leave. I've suffered with it my entire life. And I have a really long list of triggers. This includes obviously any type of enclosed space, but car washes, sometimes the back seat of cars, darkness. If night gets too dark, I'm done. When snow gets piled up on the side of the road, I start to panic. And of course, many, many Disney rides, which are, incredibly dark. And sometimes the cars are sort of small and you're on a track that you cannot control the speed of or what it's doing and where it's going. Interestingly enough, though, planes don't trigger my claustrophobia. They are big, I am small, and they take me to Disney. So I'm
I love that.
But, it's gotten worse in the last few years. I started having on rides that were too dark. It actually started, I think, in 2018 when we went on Dinosaur, something I don't recommend just in general. But it got so dark at one point, and we were moving slow enough where it occurred to me how dark it was, and I could just feel like the warehousey space closing in on me. I don't know. And then from there, I started worrying about seat restraints, and those started to make me feel nervous. And I had to return to therapy in order to make sure I could enjoy my future Disney trips. And there's nothing wrong with calling a therapist and saying, I want to have a good time at Disney, because If you call mine, they've heard it before. So for real, I still don't have very many strategies for coping with my claustrophobia. In fact, I have no strategies. I am working a little bit on exposure therapy by sitting in car washes. I have almost mastered one. I can see both ends the whole time. Not being in control is hard for me, and I really don't want it to ruin my time at Disney because I love being at Disney, and I have to get there. I have no advice, but just know if you feel trapped in Disney rides or it's way too dark for you, you are not alone. If you have ever put your hand in your purse to like hit your cell phone just to see a light, I am right there with you.
Yeah, I haven't had as much trouble as you have, but I certainly struggle with that lack of control or like the not knowing what's going to come next. And I think that's why I hate It's Tough to Be a Bug so much, is because you don't know where things are coming from. Like they're coming from the ceiling. There's like things spraying. Like some of these immersive experiences can be really scary precisely because they're so immersive and because you don't have the same like bubble of safety that you can expect from a ride vehicle in most cases. And that makes me real nervous.
Mhm. And one thing that I really use a lot of are ride through videos. If it's something I've never been on before, I find a video of it on YouTube just so I know what to expect. And also if there's going to be anything that bothers me, like, oh, that gets way too dark right at this moment, I probably shouldn't go on it. And also, I have had to bail on a ride before. We were at Universal and we went to get on the Spider-Man ride. I was going with my daughter, and they put us in a row where the seat I was at the very end, and there was like a really tall side, so I was in a corner. And it occurred to me, I'm like, I am in a corner with this wall, and it's dark in front of me. And they were like lowering the bars one row at a time, and it came close to ours. And I stood up, and I was like, no, no, no. And they let me off, and I was shaking, mouth dry, sweaty palms, full-on panic attack on a ride. And, you know, I got off, calmed down. Nothing bad happened to me after. Universal didn't find me or yell at me, and no one made me feel embarrassed for having to hop off of a ride. And then my daughter told me that that wall comes down as soon as the ride starts, so the side is totally open. But I didn't know that at the time because I didn't watch a video and I didn't know what to expect. And so I bailed on it.
Yeah, I've never bailed on a ride, but I will say that you don't have to miss out on experiences with your families just because you don't want to ride a ride. So I spent a lot of time standing in queues with my family growing up for rides that I had no intention of riding, but I would just stand in the queue with them because I wasn't really old enough to just like wander the parks on my own at that age, but I would stand in the queue with them, I would chat with them, have a nice time, and then you can get right up to the loading area and say, I'm not going to ride. And there's always a little area that they'll like walk you through to get you to the gift shop or wherever it is that the ride lets out. And so I've done that for so many rides that I knew I couldn't do. This is before the time of ride through videos. I just knew enough of the concept that I'm like, no, this is not for me. I'm far too scared to go on Tower of Terror. I've gone through that queue plenty of times and I've only ridden it once. And I'm probably not going to ride it again. So that's an option for folks as well. If you know leading up to it, you don't have to miss out on that time with your family. Or if you have another parent to take your kids on it and you don't, maybe you want to go have a nice beverage and do some shopping instead of hanging out in the queue with them, that's also an option.
And some of the lines, just as a warning for people who haven't been to Disney, sometimes the lines are really tight places too.
Yeah.
And there are a couple ways you can skip these. Occasionally, certain rides will have the ability for you to skip those, like that specific part of the line. If you ask a cast member, for example, the Haunted Mansion, the stretching room is a space that makes me feel incredibly closed in. I enjoy it enough that I sit there, although I know that it takes about 7 minutes start to finish, which is way too long for me. But if you don't want to be in that space, they can help you skip it. There is a line that goes around it and you can meet your party on the other side. Also, anxiety is a perfectly valid reason to get a disability pass, which can help you skip some of those lines that are more nerve-wracking. So many are in caves and tunnels. I don't know why Disney constantly puts us in caves, but they do. And so if that is something that is going to bother you, you can skip those lines and hop ahead to where you get on the ride. Now, you're not actually skipping the line, you're just spending your time waiting outside in the lovely open air that is not going to trap you. But Disney relies so much on darkness and tightness and crowded moments. And I am 5 foot even. So when people are around me, I can't see anything at all. So I constantly feel trapped. And I've learned that the best strategy isn't for me to figure out how to avoid all of these situations. Believe it or not, avoidance is not good for your mental health all the time. But I'm still working on getting the strategies that I need to deal. So don't ask me right now. Maybe after my next trip, I am still learning. You can find me in the car wash.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm really glad that you're working on your ability to deal, just because there are so many experiences that you'd be missing out on if you had to avoid them. So I'm glad you're working on yourself. That's wonderful. And I mean, cast members are used to this sort of thing because, like, think of how many anxious people are out there. You were not going to be the first one to be like, I don't want to go in the stretching room. They probably encounter that all the time. So I think that's really key, is just like owning your limits, whatever they are for a given trip, and speaking up for yourself, whether that's to your family or to a cast member or whomever, and just like getting the assistance that you need, because nobody's gonna bat an eye, nobody's gonna think you're weird or anything like that. So like, get what you need. Yeah, avoidance is not great, but I do plan to continue avoiding the giant fish tanks at the seas. And it's completely irrational. I recognize that it is completely irrational, but I don't want to go on Nemo anymore, and I don't want to wander around the sea space anymore. I'm going to leave that to my husband and my son. But
I have another confession that just made me think of it. The Little Mermaid ride on our last trip, you know, when you're in the seashell and it like leans back and the bubbles make you feel like you're going underwater. I was like, I am drowning. And I had to ground myself with the, you know, like 5 things I can see. That's a very easy activity to do at Disney, by the way. But
yeah. Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, sometimes avoidance is okay because you only get your one Disney trip. So like, we work on these things in between our Disney trips, and then we decide what we're gonna do on the actual trip itself. And for me, like, I don't encounter giant fish tanks in my everyday life, and so like, I'm not gonna do exposure therapy for that because it doesn't impact me right on a day-to-day basis. I don't even like fish, so I'm just gonna let them do it. I'm gonna go grab a drink and do some shopping. That's my plan for my avoidance time. So in general, most of the triggers that might result in panic attacks for me are not really like forefront on a Disney vacation, aside from the giant fish tanks. But I do have some things just to kind of watch out for and like keep checking in with myself about. And one of them is just the crowds at Disney, especially as they keep on getting bigger. I can get pretty overwhelmed with all of those people in the parks. In some cases, you're really tightly packed together, whether you expected to be or not. So there are some situations where, yeah, you would expect that you're going to be in close proximity with a lot of strangers. Sometimes it might just happen by surprise, and that's not super fun. And sometimes just being around all of those other humans is compounded by things like heat and tiredness and hunger and things that didn't go to plan, and like all of the other stimulations going on in my brain, right? And I have a feeling that this might be a bigger challenge for me on our next trip, because I've been away from all crowds for the past 2 years during this pandemic. Like, I've barely been around strangers for the past 2 years, much less the enormous crowds that are going to be waiting for me when I get to Disney World. And so next trip, I'd like to really be proactive about this concern with crowds by making sure that I take some breaks in the middle of the day when the parks are at their very busiest. Maybe I have a sit down meal. That's something that my husband is really interested in too. Maybe I just find a quiet corner of the parks to go and relax a little bit and sip on something, sit down, get off my feet, and be away from other humans. And just like take a break from all of it in the middle of the day. The lines are going to be long anyway. So, like, it's fine if I go and sit down for a little while. And then I do also think this is the theme of our our YouTube channel, but I think it'll be helpful to have a rest day mid-trip to just get out of the parks entirely for a day. And I might still encounter some crowds depending on what we wind up doing with our rest day, but I think it'll be a lot less people-y than it would be on a park day.
Definitely. Yeah, we have been planning rest days just as much as we have been planning park days.
Yes. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. Do you feel anxious before or during a Disney trip? Let us know how you handle it. And remember to like and subscribe to plan along with us.